Across the vast wilderness of America's national parks, there are places where maps fail, radios fall silent, compasses spin, and time itself seems to hesitate. Rangers call them many names: quiet pockets, dead zones, blackouts. They are marked by still air, sudden silence, and an unshakable feeling that something unseen is watching from the trees. For decades, hikers have vanished within these spaces. Cameras have erased their own footage, and entire data logs have disappeared from official records. Yet no explanation has ever been confirmed. Scientists call it coincidence, the parks call it weather, but the patterns continue, spreading slowly across forests, canyons, and lakes that no longer match their coordinates. Tonight, we follow the hidden story of these vanishing frequencies and the men and women who tried to document them only to find the evidence quietly erased. Vanishing signals. In the summer of 1977, a park ranger named Gerald Whitmore noted something unusual in his daily report from Yellowstone National Park. A large group of hikers had vanished from radio contact for nearly 6 hours while exploring the western edge near Shoshone Lake. When they re-emerged, they were calm but confused. Their watches had stopped. Their cameras showed no record of the missing hours. The ranger described it simply: all devices failed, no wind, no sound. That single line, later buried in the National Park Service logs, would become one of the earliest known mentions of what some researchers now call a blackout zone. These zones, reported in over 24 US national parks, are areas where electronic devices cease to function without explanation. Radios lose signal, GPS units display blank screens, and compasses spin slowly, as if unsure which direction exists. In most cases, the effect is temporary. Within a few minutes, everything returns to normal. But there are cases, such as in Glacier National Park in 1983, where hikers disappeared within these areas, never to be found. In 1983, a family of 4, Tom and Linda Farley, and their 2 teenage sons, set out from the Logan Pass trailhead. Park records show clear skies, low wind, and a standard route. When they failed to return, a search was launched. Rangers reported that their radios began to fail one by one near a small glacial valley. Static like a waterfall, one rescuer wrote. The rescue dogs refused to move forward past a certain line of trees. The search was eventually called off after 10 days. The family was never recovered. No remains, no gear. A year later, a single camera belonging to the Farleys was found 14 miles away. The film inside had melted, though the casing showed no burn marks. Researchers from the University of Colorado conducted a quiet study in 1992 after multiple field teams experienced similar interference during geological surveys. Using magnetometers, they recorded abrupt dips in local magnetic field intensity within a 60-meter radius around certain rock formations. The results were never formally published. One of the scientists, Dr. Paul Reiner, later stated in an interview that the data contradicted what we knew about the region's geology. He suggested that these blackout areas were not consistent with natural anomalies like magnetite deposits or solar storms. Instead, they seemed localized, deliberate, and highly specific. In Sequoia National Park, a park employee named Henry Talbot kept a handwritten log between 1987 and 1991. It contained entries describing small circular clearings where wildlife avoided resting and where his radio crackled endlessly. One note from August 1989 reads, "Evening patrol heard voices over static, not English, not recorded on tape." When Talbot retired, the notebooks were quietly stored in the park archive. A copy later surfaced in a 2013 Freedom of Information Act request made by an independent researcher. The handwriting was shaky, but consistent. The pages describing the blackout sites were heavily redacted. Satellite technicians working with NOAA in 2004 noticed brief gaps in transmission data from certain forested regions. These areas corresponded with national parks in Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. The gaps lasted from a few seconds to several minutes. While most were attributed to cloud interference or line-of-sight issues, at least 6 were marked as unexplained terrestrial signal loss. One engineer described it as like someone turning off the sky for a moment. Visitors have also reported similar events. A solo camper named Rachel Donovan recounted her experience in 2016 near Crater Lake. "The birds stopped," she said in an interview. "My phone went black. I couldn't even see the screen glow. It was like it had no power source." She stayed still for nearly 10 minutes until the air pressure seemed to shift and sound returned. The phone later turned on, showing no battery loss. In Shenandoah National Park, a group of researchers attempting to document old telegraph lines along the Appalachian Corridor experienced full equipment shutdown for approximately 9 minutes in 2019. Laptops, cameras, and GPS receivers all failed simultaneously. When power returned, their digital clocks showed different times each off by several minutes. The team reported the incident to the National Park Service, but no follow-up investigation was made. One of the most puzzling cases came from Yosemite in 1997. 2 park maintenance workers surveying storm damage along the Tioga Road walked into an area near a cluster of granite ridges. Both reported hearing a deep hum that seemed to come from the ground. They lost radio contact and described a faint metallic taste in the air. When they walked out of the area, their watches were 11 minutes apart. The event was noted in an internal safety memo, though no cause was identified. Some have proposed simple explanations: magnetic interference from iron-rich rock, solar activity, or atmospheric anomalies. Others suggest experimental military communication fields or remnants of Cold War infrastructure buried deep in the wilderness. Still, none of these theories account for the consistency of the locations. Many blackout zones are found near old indigenous sacred sites or regions where ancient stone formations remain unstudied. A few independent researchers have begun mapping these coordinates, comparing them with missing person reports and military flight paths. One such map, compiled in 2020 by amateur analyst Gordon Klein, shows an oddly uniform spacing pattern between the zones roughly 33 miles apart across major western parks. He described the pattern as too organized to be geological, too silent to be man-made. The National Park Service does not acknowledge the existence of blackout zones. Officially, the term does not appear in any public documentation. However, former employees have privately confirmed that certain radio frequencies are restricted for environmental protection reasons within specific park boundaries. In 2021, a group of hikers near Mount Rainier reported losing contact with emergency services during a mild storm. For 7 hours, no communication reached them. When they finally emerged, one hiker claimed to have heard a low mechanical vibration during the silence. Their GPS trackers showed that they had remained within a 1-mile radius the entire time. Yet, the rescue team's helicopter thermal imaging could not detect them, despite clear conditions. Such accounts continue to surface, quietly short mentions on ranger logs, deleted online reports, half-finished interviews. Each follows a pattern: a defined area, total loss of signal, brief disorientation, and return to normal as if nothing happened. There is no official explanation, only a growing list of coordinates. The silence between frequencies. In 1994, a field communications technician named Andrew Heller was sent to Yosemite to repair a faulty ranger radio relay. He expected a broken antenna or damaged wiring. What he found was harder to describe. The signal tower was intact, yet when he approached it, his handheld radio emitted no sound at all, not static, not white noise, just silence. He tapped the casing, checked the batteries, even switched channels. Nothing. When he stepped backward, the static returned. When he moved forward again, silence. He marked the spot in his notebook. Signal dies here. Air feels heavy. Instances like Heller's have appeared across several US national parks. In reports collected between 1975 and 2020, the same phrase appears again and again. No sound, no static, total drop. Scientists refer to these moments as frequency collapses, periods when electromagnetic transmissions vanish across multiple wavelengths, from radio to microwave. The collapses don't behave like typical interference. They come and go without clear cause, often centered in small circular zones, no more than a few hundred feet wide. In Glacier National Park, a 2002 maintenance log describes a helicopter crew losing both GPS and radio contact for 73 seconds over Hidden Lake. When connection returned, their altitude readings were off by nearly 90 feet, despite no change in position. The pilot, Captain Leon Curtis, later wrote, "It felt like we were suspended in something thicker than air, instruments dead. Then everything snapped back. The incident was recorded as a temporary atmospheric anomaly." Sound, too, seems to behave strangely within these blackout fields. Campers have reported moments of total quiet, no wind through trees, no birds, no footstep echoes. In one case documented near Zion National Park in 1998, a hiker described the stillness as so absolute it hurt my ears. When his companion spoke, her voice carried only a few feet before vanishing, as though swallowed. They left the area within minutes, unsettled. Acoustic engineers studying these reports have speculated about unusual geological compositions that might absorb or refract sound. Caves, dense vegetation, and mineral-rich soil can distort wave propagation, yet the patterns recorded in national parks don't align with these known conditions. A 2015 study, led by Dr. Isaac Moreno, used broadband sensors to measure ambient noise levels across 14 affected sites. Each registered a sudden drop in decibel readings during the same short time windows when magnetic irregularities spiked. "It's as if the frequencies themselves vanish," Moreno said, "not blocked, gone." At Rocky Mountain National Park, rangers once tested the local repeaters after a series of failed rescue calls. They positioned teams at known problem zones and broadcast test messages. Each message, transmitted every 30 seconds, reached its destination, except when one ranger stepped into a specific clearing near Mills Lake. The moment he crossed an invisible boundary, his radio turned silent. He stepped back, signal returned. He repeated it several times. Each result was identical. The line was invisible, precise, and constant. Older analog devices appeared just as vulnerable. Photographers have found film fogged or entirely blank after walking through certain areas. Compass needles drift lazily before returning north. Even mechanical watches sometimes lose minutes. It isn't radiation, according to preliminary checks. Dosimeter readings remain normal. Instead, something seems to affect electromagnetic coherence itself, how frequencies maintain structure in a field. The term blackout zone first appeared in an internal National Park Service memorandum from 1981, though it was replaced soon after with the phrase communications dead sector. Publicly, no such terminology is used today. However, some retired personnel have spoken quietly about unofficial mapping efforts. One former Yosemite ranger, interviewed anonymously in 2008, claimed that each park maintains silent files, hand-drawn overlays marking where devices fail. "You won't see them on public maps," he said, "but everyone who's worked here long enough knows where the radios die." Military interest has occasionally intersected with these areas. In 1979, an Air Force research team conducted a low-altitude radar survey over the Pacific Northwest. Classified fragments of that study, later released through a declassified archive, describe persistent pockets of broadband signal attenuation in mountainous forest zones. The report did not name the parks directly, but the coordinates aligned with Olympic and Mount Rainier regions. The researchers could not identify any natural cause. By the mid-2000s, digital equipment had improved, yet the anomalies remained. Satellite phones, which rely on orbiting networks rather than local repeaters, still failed. Rangers in Denali National Park reported blank screens on thermal cameras during search operations. In 2018, a drone team mapping tree density over North Cascades lost control of their craft for 4 minutes. The flight logs later showed missing data timestamps during the blackout window. The same patterns recur: complete silence, disoriented time readings, malfunctioning sensors, and abrupt restoration. Geophysicists have considered if subsurface metallic deposits could generate microelectromagnetic vortices, but none have been located in test borings near known sites. The magnetic readings don't match any known ore concentration. What's left is a pattern of absence places, where signal, sound, and even time measurements collapse into stillness. Heller's 1,994 notes described it most clearly: not interference, more like nothingness. That phrase has since been cited by researchers cataloguing over 160 reported zones across the continental United States. In 2020, a private research collective using field sensors detected a similar drop near Grand Teton National Park. Their instruments recorded simultaneous data loss across multiple frequencies, followed by clock desynchronization lasting several minutes. The event ended as suddenly as it began. One of the researchers summarized it in a single line of his log: silence between frequencies. No government agency has offered an explanation. Park officials continue to describe these events as rare signal interference or atmospheric anomalies. Yet the silence, the pattern, and the precision remain steady and unresolved. Lost coordinates. In 2007, the National Search and Rescue Database quietly flagged an irregular pattern among missing person reports within US national parks. Analysts noted that certain coordinates appeared repeatedly, often separated by years, even decades. The coordinates were imprecise, not because of human error, but because GPS logs showed drift. Devices placed on fixed landmarks, rocks, signposts, ranger cabins would gradually record movement of up to several hundred feet without any geological shift. The phenomenon was first dismissed as equipment fault, but after a series of rescues in 2011, where helicopter crews found themselves circling wrong valleys despite precise coordinates, the problem was reconsidered. That same year, the US Geological Survey ran a calibration test across 17 national parks, deploying standard GPS units on static points. Over a 6-week period, 6 of those devices produced readings that oscillated rhythmically like invisible tides shifting under the land. The data showed repeating deviations peaking every 11 days. "We expected small drift from satellite movement," said project geodesist Lisa Chang, "but not synchronized errors at fixed terrestrial points. In Glacier National Park, these shifts have complicated rescue operations for decades." In 1989, a team searching for a missing photographer, Alan Whitby, followed coordinates transmitted by his emergency beacon. They reached the site only to find bare rock. The signal persisted for 3 more days, each time relocating itself a short distance west, as if being dragged. When the beacon was eventually recovered weeks later, it was located in an area never marked on the ranger's grid. Its casing was intact, its batteries still charged, but its memory chip contained no log of movement. Satellite imaging has shown similar irregularities. Beginning in 2004, NASA's Earth Observing System recorded repeated pixel displacement along the northern edges of Yellowstone and Yosemite. The anomalies were small, sometimes less than a meter, but consistent. When superimposed on ranger trail maps, they corresponded to known blackout or signal loss zones. In 2018, a research team at Stanford attempted to reprocess the imagery using a stable geodetic framework. Even with refined algorithms, the regions appeared blurred, as if the terrain resisted precise mapping. Surveyor logs from Mount Rainier tell similar stories. A 1,995 expedition set up a triangulation station at an elevation of 8,300 feet. After a snowstorm, they returned to find the marker displaced 40 feet, though the snowpack showed no disturbance. Theodolite readings confirmed the original reference points remained fixed, yet the new coordinates no longer aligned. "It's as if space folded subtly," one surveyor wrote. "The math held, but the land didn't." Rangers rely on GPS not just for location, but for safety. During wildfires, teams use live coordinate relays to track personnel movement. Yet in Sequoia and Denali, archived telemetry has shown fragments of trails, routes that diverge for several minutes before returning to normal. These ghost paths, as one analyst called them, appear in data playback as faint lines, leading nowhere, vanishing mid-forest. When plotted, they intersect the very areas identified as blackout zones in earlier reports. The most public case of coordinate drift occurred in 2014, when a group of hikers went missing in the Olympic National Park wilderness. Their GPS tracker transmitted a stable signal until 3:17 p.m. on August 9. The next data point, 6 minutes later, placed them 1.4 miles northeast across a river, through terrain impassable without climbing gear. No tracks, no rope marks, no crossings were found. The recovered device later displayed timestamps from 2 different time zones. In 2019, a private navigation company, TerraTrack, conducted controlled tests using commercial-grade receivers across Oregon's forest reserves. They documented frequency interference on the L2 and L5 GPS bands, those reserved for military precision, despite no nearby transmitters. Data packets vanished mid-transmission, then reappeared slightly altered. "It's not jamming," said Chief Analyst Greg Henson. "It's as if something bends the coordinates temporarily, then releases them." Not all discrepancies involve disappearance. In some parks, coordinates appear to replicate. Duplicate GPS signals, nearly identical but offset by several hundred meters, confuse navigation software. Pilots conducting low-altitude surveys near Crater Lake have reported seeing dual position markers blinking on their displays, one stable, one moving independently. When they log the event, the system overwrites the original coordinates as if uncertain, which is real. Digital mapping companies often leave these regions uncorrected, labeling them data voids or terrain ambiguity. Few outside the mapping industry notice, yet field researchers say these small voids, when linked together, form a loose pattern stretching from Washington down to New Mexico, following the spine of the Rocky Mountains. When plotted in 3 dimensions, the anomalies trace a shallow curve eastward, forming what one data analyst called a ghost line of geography. Some geophysicists have speculated about gravitational microvariations caused by dense subsurface formations, which might subtly affect satellite triangulation. But in 2022, the US Naval Observatory ruled out such causes, stating the displacements do not align with any known geophysical mass distributions. The same year, a hiker's smartwatch recorded overlapping coordinate readings inside Shenandoah National Park. The device showed his position both on and off the mapped trail simultaneously for 20 minutes. The data, uploaded later, displayed twin paths weaving together like threads. He reported no unusual sensations other than brief pressure in his ears. Across archives and field reports, a quiet consensus forms. Coordinates in certain wilderness zones cannot be trusted. They move, duplicate, and distort, as if geography itself hesitates between states. No official explanation has been issued, but the logs remain. Each misplaced data point marks another small gap in the map, an invisible fracture line where space, signal, and certainty lose their alignment. The disappearing maps. In late 2009, a digital cartographer named Evelyn Rourke was updating US Geological Survey base layers for the Sierra Nevada region when she noticed a gap, an entire square mile of terrain missing from the rendering. It was not a file error or a failed download. The data cell existed, but contained nothing. When she refreshed the server the next morning, the void had closed. The forest and ridge lines had reappeared, yet subtle differences in elevation values suggested the terrain had been rewritten. Rourke noted it in her personal log. Map recompiled overnight. Elevation changed by 3.4 meters. No record of edit. She was not the first to see it. Since the late 1970s, aerial cartographers and survey pilots have reported temporary absences, patches of land that failed to appear on imagery, or radar returns that showed smooth blanks where dense forest should be. During a 1981 flyover of North Cascades National Park, two U.S. Forest Service pilots described blank film segments as though the camera had recorded white sky instead of mountain terrain. When developed, the frames were intact, yet devoid of any surface features. They labeled the incident film washout, though exposure data later ruled out light failure. Satellite cartography intensified these observations. Beginning in 2003, NASA's Landsat 7 began transmitting occasional image segments showing grey, static blocks, geometrically perfect and confined to national park boundaries. Engineers called them no-data anomalies. These blocks would vanish after subsequent passes, replaced with seemingly normal forest patterns. But when pixel layers were compared across months, the ground texture had subtly changed. Rock formations shifted several meters. Tree shadow directions reversed inconsistently with sun angle. A 2010 NOAA memo, circulated quietly among surveyors, referenced terrain volatility events. One paragraph described how landform profiles temporarily disappear from topographic databases and reappear with altered coordinate anchoring. Though the agency issued no public comment, the language implied something more complex than satellite error. The memo was later redacted in official archives. In Denali National Park, mapping teams have occasionally encountered coordinates that refuse to stabilize. A 2015 drone survey found that identical flight paths, flown within 24 hours, produced terrain models that didn't align. Riverbends slightly moved, glacial crevices rearranged. As if the mountain exhaled, wrote field engineer Daniel Croft in his post-mission summary. Everything shifts, but leaves no sign. The datasets were archived, flagged, and left uncorrected. Older paper maps show traces of similar inconsistencies. Vintage US Geological Survey sheets from the 1940 seconds and 1950 seconds contain faint pencil marks, hastily redrawn contour lines, or erased ridges. Archivists reviewing these maps have noted annotations like discrepancy check next flight or ridge absent this season. When overlaid on modern satellite models, several of these disputed features still fail to match. In 2016, a private mapping company performing LiDAR scans over Yosemite recorded complete data dropout across a triangular region roughly 800 meters wide. When the scanner returned to normal function, the digital terrain model showed a mirrored section of forest, a duplicate image displaced northward by about 100 feet. The team assumed an algorithmic glitch until cross-checking physical ground points collected earlier. The displaced area corresponded precisely with a previously documented blackout zone. In some parks, even handheld GPS mapping devices have recorded ghost layers, temporary duplicates of paths, cliffs, and waterways. Cartographers reviewing field data describe these artifacts as terrain echoes. They appear for hours, sometimes days, then vanish from servers as if overwritten by the original geography. One ranger technician described it bluntly: "The land reboots." By 2018, enough incidents had accumulated that the US Forest Service quietly consulted outside specialists. Among them was geospatial analyst Howard Baines, who had studied unexplained coordinate drift in polar mapping. In a closed presentation at a Denver conference, he displayed time-lapse overlays of Mount Rainier National Park from 2004 to 2017. When shown sequentially, the park's ridgelines seemed to ripple, subtly changing height and curvature every few years. Baines referred to the effect as terrain phase shifting, though he emphasized it was not visible to the human eye on location only through compiled satellite data. Airline pilots flying cross-country routes occasionally encounter radar ghosts in similar regions. FAA logs from 1,992 onward list at least 12 cases where radar plots flickered blank for several seconds over national park airspace. The pilots saw clear weather, instruments showed stable altitude, yet the ground beneath momentarily disappeared from radar return, replaced by static. These gaps, known colloquially as ghost hollows, often occurred over the same coordinates as prior map anomalies. The phenomenon extends underwater as well. In 2020, hydrographic mapping of Lake Yellowstone recorded sudden loss of sonar return across sections of the lakebed. The equipment showed void return, meaning the sonar pulse encountered no reflective surface. When the scan repeated hours later, the lake floor was back, unchanged in contour, but slightly altered in depth calibration. Government agencies publicly attribute such errors to processing lag, cloud interference, or sensor desynchronization. Yet internally, project managers continue to document them. A declassified memo from 2019 describes these spaces in neutral language: geospatial gaps of indeterminate cause, short-lived, recurring, spatially consistent. GARM. Some independent researchers have begun archiving the vanishings themselves. The online collective, known as Blackout, maintains time-coded screenshots of missing terrain tiles from Google Earth and government mapping servers. Their archive shows that the disappearances often occur at night between 2 and 4 a.m. UTC, reappearing before dawn. When compared frame by frame, the restored tiles show small alterations: trees realigned, shadows erased, or structures absent that existed the previous day. The National Park Service has not commented on these records, but inside certain ranger offices, printed maps still hang with faint pencil notes, tiny circles marking where the land sometimes fails to appear. The human factor. In 1984, a seasonal ranger named Thomas Avery disappeared for 2 hours while conducting a solo perimeter check near Jenny Lake in Grand Teton National Park. When he returned, he was pale, quiet, and disoriented. His logbook, written hours later, recorded a single sentence: "I thought I was walking in a circle, but the forest didn't end." Colleagues dismissed it as fatigue, yet Avery's compass had spun aimlessly for much of that time, and his radio carried only static. His wristwatch had lost 13 minutes. Such experiences repeat across the decades, consistent in tone and detail. People who enter blackout zones describe not terror, but a subtle disconnection, like being removed from sound, time, and weight. In 1992, a wildlife photographer named Marlene Pitts camped alone near the base of Mount Olympus in Washington. She later told a local paper that the woods became still, like they were holding their breath. Her watchlight dimmed, the air felt thick. She tried to call out, but her voice sounded distant, as if it came from behind her. When the silence lifted, hours had passed, though her campfire still burned high. For rangers, these accounts pose a professional dilemma. Their job demands rational explanations: weather, magnetism, fatigue. But many admit the sensations themselves defy description. A 2011 internal survey, conducted among park staff, anonymously asked whether anyone had experienced unexplained perceptual anomalies while on duty. 47% answered yes. Several described losing track of direction, even on familiar trails. One wrote, "My GPS said I was moving while I stood still." Another, "Sound dropped out, but my heartbeat echoed louder." Rescue personnel have similar testimonies. In 2006, a a team searching for 2 lost hikers in Sequoia National Park reported auditory dampening near the Marble Fork area. Team leader Alan Pierce wrote in his after-action note that it felt like being wrapped in cotton. The team's spotter claimed that shouting sounded muted and the crackle of their radios turned to low pulses. When they exited the canyon, sound returned gradually. The 2 missing hikers were later found safe, disoriented, but unharmed. They said they had seen a shimmer between trees and felt as if they had walked into fog, though the air had been clear. Some rangers keep private records. A now retired employee from Glacier National Park, known only as L. Morrison, compiled a handwritten list of quiet spots during his 24-year tenure. The list includes notes like voices drift don't echo, color fades to gray, and smell of ozone. His final entry from 2001 reads, "It watches back." When asked later what he meant, Morrison replied, "You feel seen, like the forest notices you." Visitors echo this sentiment. In 2018, a group of campers in Shenandoah reported a low vibration humming through the ground late at night. Their lanterns flickered and the temperature dropped several degrees. When they tried to leave the area, their compass needles pointed east no matter which way they faced. One camper described a moment when she knew something was standing behind her, though everyone else saw nothing. They left before dawn and reported headaches for days afterward. Psychologists who study perception in wilderness isolation attribute these sensations to stress, hypoxia, or infrasound low-frequency vibrations caused by wind or shifting terrain. Infrasound can create feelings of unease, confusion, even presence, yet the measured frequencies from reported blackout zones don't align with known environmental patterns. Instruments placed by independent researchers in 2019 across affected areas of Olympic National Park recorded fluctuating low-frequency pulses that did not correspond to weather, seismic, or wildlife activity. Pilots described their own versions of disorientation. During a 1997 supply drop at Denali, co-pilot Susan Kell reported that the mountains flattened out visually as their navigation systems glitched. The ridges looked closer, then further away. For a second, it was like flying over a painting. Ground control later confirmed that both altimeters briefly displayed identical false readings. The anomaly lasted less than 2 minutes. Rangers sometimes describe memory gaps, brief stretches where they cannot recall their route, though their footprints confirm movement. In 2012, a ranger in Yosemite recounted finding himself suddenly a mile away from his last recorded position with no recollection of the terrain in between. "I didn't black out," he said. "I just wasn't there for that distance." His radio had gone silent during the same interval. Even more unsettling are the consistent physiological effects. Field teams entering known blackout areas often report vertigo, a metallic taste, or pressure around the ears, symptoms similar to exposure to electromagnetic fields. Yet magnetometers show no spikes. Heart rate monitors log irregular rhythms. The body seems to register disturbance that instruments cannot verify. Some witnesses describe altered perception of light. Photographers have taken frames in which colors appear washed or shadows misaligned. In a 2003 Yosemite case, 2 rangers conducting trail inspection found that their headlamps failed to illuminate beyond a few feet, though batteries tested full. When they exited the zone, the lamps brightened instantly. "Like walking through thick glass," one wrote. For those who spend their lives inside these parks, the silence becomes familiar. They learn to recognize the warning signs, the sudden stop of wind, the stillness of animals, the flattening of sound. Most turn back. A few step forward, out of curiosity or duty, and find themselves briefly elsewhere. Across decades of reports, one phrase repeats in ranger notes, hiker journals, and pilot logs. "It felt wrong, but calm." Not fear, not panic, just stillness. The kind that presses close, erasing boundaries between observer and place. In these zones, humans describe not being lost in the forest, but the forest rearranging around them. The missing minutes. On the 14th of July 1983, a park volunteer named Diane Holloway entered a section of the Great Smoky Mountains to record trail conditions after a summer storm. She logged her start time at 10:06 a.m. on her ranger-issued clipboard. When she returned, the station clock read 12:47 p.m. Her wristwatch matched the same time, but her log entries made in consistent handwriting ended at 10:42. She had no memory of the 2-hour gap. Her camera held 6 photographs she didn't remember taking, each showing a tree-lined path under dim light, though the day had been bright. Holloway wrote in her report, it felt like only half an hour. Across US national parks, similar stories repeat. Time lost, altered, or misaligned. Rangers, pilots, and hikers report watches running slow, cameras with timestamps hours apart, and GPS logs where seconds stretch or vanish. In 1995, 2 surveyors in Yosemite set out to mark boundary coordinates using synchronized chronometers. When they reconvened 3 hours later, both devices were off, one ahead by 14 minutes, the other behind by 8. The time drift increased the deeper they worked into a narrow canyon. "We couldn't agree what time it was," one of them later said. "Even our shadows felt delayed." Time distortion has been mentioned in internal maintenance notes as early as 1968. A Yosemite technician repairing a weather sensor on Cloud's Rest Ridge recorded that his stopwatch jumped 23 minutes ahead without any mechanical reason. The same phenomenon appeared again during a 1979 study at Glacier National Park, when geologists tracking seismic data found synchronized instruments suddenly misaligned by several minutes. The data loggers showed no restart or interference. Electronic watches are not alone. Even analog ones seem affected. A Sequoia ranger in 1988 reported that his mechanical wristwatch stopped ticking during a patrol near Mineral King. When he left the valley, it resumed immediately and kept correct time thereafter. "It just paused," he wrote. In the years following, similar incidents were recorded by visitors and staff alike, timepieces halting briefly as though waiting for something to catch up. During a 2001 rescue mission in Zion National Park, helicopter pilot Mark Dyson reported confusion when his onboard clock jumped backward 6 minutes mid-flight. Ground control confirmed that their own system showed normal time. The aircraft's GPS, however, also lagged behind. "It's like we flew through a pocket where the clock hiccuped," Dyson later explained in a debrief. Maintenance teams found no faults in the navigation systems. Park technicians began quietly comparing event times across blackout zones in 2007. They noticed a consistent offset of 5 to 15 minutes between equipment inside and outside affected areas. The discrepancies didn't match satellite timing errors, which are usually on the scale of milliseconds. Instead, the readings resembled isolated bubbles of asynchronous timing pockets, where time itself seemed to slow or stretch. One of the clearest sets of evidence came from Shenandoah National Park in 2015. During a drone mapping flight, technicians observed their onboard clock reading 2:06 p.m. The ground-based unit recorded 2:18. The flight lasted 12 minutes, yet playback showed a gap of 28. The drone video displayed consistent light, no indication of an extended flight. "We were missing 16 minutes, said project engineer Carla Morton. "The sun didn't move, but the clock did." Rangers working night shifts often described these distortions more personally. In 1999, a Yellowstone ranger named Peter Vaughan noted that the stars seemed slower one night near Hayden Valley. He had timed his patrol by the motion of Orion's belt across the sky. The pattern should have shifted 15 degrees in an hour, but after nearly 90 minutes, it had barely moved. He verified the reading. With his watch, only 63 minutes had passed. The constellations, it seemed, were ahead of him. Visitors have also encountered these temporal slips. A hiker named Rachel Lim recorded an experience in 2019 at Olympic National Park. "My phone said 4:12. My friends said 4:26. Neither changed for what felt like half an hour." When they returned to camp, the rest of their group claimed they had been gone for nearly 2 hours. Their phones later resumed syncing automatically. No battery loss was recorded. In 2021, a field experiment by independent researchers used synchronized atomic clocks' high-precision instruments to test whether measurable shifts occurred inside reported blackout zones. The devices were placed at 3 locations in Yellowstone for 24 hours. When retrieved, 2 showed no anomaly. The third, located within a known signal loss area near Shoshone Lake, had gained 4.2 seconds. The experiment was repeated twice more, with similar results. The difference was small, but statistically consistent. Some scientists have suggested environmental causes, geomagnetic fluctuations, underground mineral charges, or even gravitational gradients caused by subsurface density variations. However, such effects are too minor to account for minutes of discrepancy. Others point to instrument desynchronization, but this fails to explain simultaneous analog drift or photographic inconsistencies. Among those who have experienced the missing minutes firsthand, the sensation is always subtle. "It's not like you black out," said former ranger Emily Rhodes, who spent 18 years patrolling Yosemite. "It's like the world breathes slower, and you breathe with it. Then everything speeds back up, and you don't realize what you lost until you check your watch. When technicians later compare event logs, radio transmissions, emergency calls, sensor recordings, they find overlapping patterns, gaps, silence, and reappearances, exactly offset by lost time. It is as if, for short intervals, portions of the park fall slightly out of sync with the rest of the world. No official explanation has been issued. The National Park Service's public statements reference minor timing inconsistencies attributed to equipment calibration drift. Yet off record, some staff describe the phenomenon differently. One ranger, speaking anonymously in 2020, summarized it in 5 words: "Time bends where signals fail. The missing minutes continue to accumulate, scattered, quiet, and unresolved across the hidden coordinates of America's wilderness." The Ranger's log. Inside the archives of Yosemite's Ranger headquarters, a weathered binder labeled Incident Reports Miscellaneous sits on the lowest shelf. It contains a collection of handwritten notes, unsigned memos, and pages torn from personal journals. The papers are uneven, some written in pencil, others typed on fading carbon copies. No dates connect them in sequence, yet each describes the same quiet anomalies: silence, static, and lost time. Someone, decades ago, began gathering what official channels could not classify. The earliest entries date back to 1954. A ranger identified only as J. Tanner writes about a dead frequency zone near Hetch Hetchy Valley, where two-way radios ceased transmission. He adds a single line at the bottom of his report: "I returned the next day, and the trail markers had changed position. No follow-up file exists." Another page, from 1959, mentions a campsite that shifted slightly downslope overnight, though rangers found no landslide or erosion. The writer's name is partially smudged by rain. By the 1970 seconds, the logs grow longer, more detailed. Ranger Leonard Harms, stationed at Yellowstone in 1974, recorded week-by-week observations of sudden radio blackouts lasting precise intervals: 8 minutes, 13 minutes, 17 minutes. He believed the timing formed a pattern and began cross-referencing park activity with solar data. When he submitted his findings, his supervisor noted in red pencil, "No further time to be spent on this." 2 years later, Harms transferred to another district. His final note before leaving reads, "Something resets itself here." A series of loose-leaf pages dated 1982 contain sketches of circular clearings and faint diagrams of compass headings. The handwriting belongs to Ranger Elaine Porter, who worked in Sequoia. Her entries describe low vibrations, wildlife avoidance, and thin air that caused lightheadedness. In one margin, she writes, "Trees lean away." She was reassigned in 1983 after a routine psychological evaluation. Her replacement, a rookie named Sam Navarro, added a final pencil comment beside her drawing: "I've seen this too." Through the 1990 seconds, the tone shifts from observation to caution. Rangers begin using euphemisms: quiet pockets, dead paths, frequency dips. They note dates and coordinates but avoid speculation. One log from 1997 includes a warning in block letters: "Do not send volunteers past ridge marker 32. No reason is provided. Several pages in the binder bear faint water damage, the ink blurred. One fragment reads, "Heard tapping underground. Too slow for machinery." Another, "Lights between trees. No heat source." None assigned, but the handwriting is steady, likely professional. The uniform tone suggests multiple authors recording under a shared understanding of discretion. Rangers from Yellowstone, Glacier, and Shenandoah often use similar shorthand. Meant silence lasting more than 3 minutes. NF stood for no frequency. R meant return when sound or signal came back abruptly. These notations appear repeatedly in logs from 1988 through 2004. The codes were never part of official ranger training, implying they evolved informally among those who had encountered blackout zones firsthand. In 2008, a Freedom of Information Act request by an independent journalist retrieved partial scans of these internal reports. Most pages were heavily redacted. Lines describing environmental conditions remained, but anything referencing silence or missing time was blacked out. Margins showed clipped words: magnetic, pulse, shift. The public version of the documents listed them as archival weather observations. Yet among retired staff, the private journals tell more. Ranger Harold Kent who served in Glacier for 23 years, self-published a small memoir in 2012. It sold only a few dozen copies. One passage recounts a night patrol when his radio clocked 11:42 p.m., repeatedly for nearly half an hour. He described walking beneath the same twisted pine 3 times, though he hadn't turned around. "It wasn't like being lost," he wrote. "It was like the trail looped back without my feet moving." Other journals echo the same tone of restrained confusion. In 1991, Ranger Darlene Chu wrote that she had been instructed to record without interpretation after noting faint humming near Crater Lake. Her supervisor circled the entry and added, "Avoid mention of frequency variation in report copy." Later, she penciled in a small triangle symbol, the same shape found in other rangers' notebooks from different parks. The mark's meaning was never explained. Occasionally, the logs reveal quiet defiance. One undated page from an unknown park includes the line, "If this entry disappears, it means it happened again." The next page is blank. Digital records introduced after 2010 changed how these notes were kept. Many rangers began saving incident details on encrypted handheld devices. Yet IT audits show recurring missing entries files skipped in sequence, timestamps inconsistent. Some archives contain logs saved twice, one of them identical, except for missing lines. The deleted text is never recovered. In 2018, a newly assigned ranger at Olympic National Park, reviewing old field data, found a hidden directory on the station's local server labeled Ranger Logs OLD. Inside were 243 text files, each titled with coordinates. Opening them revealed plain text, temperature, wind, visibility, and one recurring phrase, "Observation withheld." No signatures, no explanations. Across thousands of miles of preserved wilderness, the handwriting changes, the language evolves, but the pattern stays constant: silence, lost time, reappearance, restraint. Each ranger's log captures fragments of the same puzzle, the attempt to describe something that erases its own description. In one of the final pages of the Yosemite binder, a note from 1990 reads, "Not everything unrecorded is unknown. The handwriting is small and deliberate. The ink faded to brown. Beneath it, a later hand added in pencil, 'It still happens.'" The logs remain locked in climate-controlled storage. Officially, they document weather, patrol routes, and equipment checks. Unofficially, they are the only record of those who wrote down what should not have vanished: the disconnected calls. At 2:41 p.m. on the 19th of June 1999, a 911 dispatcher in Boise received a call from a man who identified himself as a ranger stationed near the southern boundary of Yellowstone National Park. His voice was steady at first, then faint, layered with static. "We've lost one," he said. Signal went, and the line cut off. When technicians traced the number, it didn't match any issued satellite or park service phone. The call log remained active for 7 minutes, though no sound followed after the interruption. Audio analysts later confirmed that the background noise abruptly ended, as if the entire transmission source had vanished mid-air. Dozens of such calls exist, fragmented transmissions that begin inside US national parks and end in silence. The term used internally among dispatchers is broken loops. They start like ordinary emergencies and abruptly stop without disconnecting. When they resume, the voice continues the sentence as if no time has passed, though minutes or even hours have elapsed in real time. The speaker seems unaware of any interruption. The earliest known case dates to October 1977. A ranger in Glacier National Park radioed a distress call reporting a lost hiker in the Hidden Lake area. His transmission lasted 12 seconds before it dissolved into a high-pitched tone. 17 minutes later, his voice reappeared mid-word, finishing the same sentence, "Last seen near the ridge." The timestamp on the recovered recording was continuous, suggesting the transmission had never technically stopped. Both the ranger and the missing hiker were later found unharmed, unaware of the anomaly. In 1988, a civilian hiker named Sandra Moya placed an emergency call from a payphone at Yosemite's visitor center to report strange lights near her campsite. The call began normally, but the operator's recording shows an 11-second delay between Moya's words and their reception, longer than possible for analog relay systems. Her voice also duplicated faintly in the background, a perfect echo delayed by half a second. Engineers who reviewed the tape described it as a loopback with impossible latency. When rangers reached her campsite 2 hours later, she was gone. Her car remained in the lot for 3 days before being towed. The case file remains open, categorized as missing adult, cause undetermined. Park rangers, accustomed to radio blackouts, often hear stranger things. A Sequoia ranger recalled a 1,994 incident where a distress call came through clear, but in a voice that no one recognized. It sounded official calm, standard protocol, but the call sign didn't exist, he said later. When they replayed the tape, the voice identified itself as Unit 6B, a designation retired 2 years earlier after its operator had died in a climbing accident. The same voice repeated a set of coordinates that led to an empty clearing. By 2003, digital logs began recording partial voice packets rather than analog tapes. Analysts noticed something unusual in calls made during signal loss incidents, metadata timestamps that didn't align. A call recorded at 1422 UTC might contain data packets logged between 1359 and 1447. The audio, however, played as a seamless conversation. It's like time folded inside the file, one IT specialist wrote in an internal memo. In 2012, dispatchers in Denver, monitoring Rocky Mountain National Park, received a brief emergency transmission. The caller identified as Ranger Webb, reporting an injured climber near Longs Peak. The message lasted less than 30 seconds before dissolving into static. When cross-checked, no ranger named Webb was scheduled in that area. Rangers on-site reported no climbers injured or missing. Yet 6 hours later, an identical transmission was logged. Same words, same tone, same background sounds, down to the second. Digital comparison showed no variation whatsoever between the two files. These anomalies extend beyond ranger channels. In 2018, hikers in Oregon's Crater Lake region accidentally recorded part of a radio distress broadcast on a handheld scanner app. The transmission included a male voice repeating "Mayday visibility 0" before fading. The hikers' phones saved the broadcast at 9:14 p.m. local time. The same file later showed a modified creation date of 10:36 p.m. with no system edits. Even civilian 911 systems occasionally capture phantom echoes. In 2019, an operator in Spokane, Washington, received a call lasting 42 seconds from a number registered to a camper who had died 2 years earlier in Glacier. The voice was faint but recognizable after forensic comparison. It said, "Storms moving fast north ridge, lost line of sight." The line went silent, then disconnected. Telecommunications experts attributed it to data corruption, though the recovered audio was clear and complete. Rangers describe these calls with an uneasy acceptance. They occur irregularly, often around the same remote valleys where signals vanish. Some refer to them as return transmissions, voices re-emerging after intervals that don't align with human or technological timing. Dispatchers sometimes hear background noises that contradict the time of day birdsong at night, wind when the local weather is still. A 2021 review of emergency logs, conducted by a National Park Service technician, identified 38 separate cases of repeated transmissions. Most were written off as duplicate files. However, careful comparison revealed minute differences in frequency compression that indicated re-encoding at different times, not mere copies. In other words, the same call had re-entered the system hours later, as if resent from nowhere. The recordings share one quality: no distress ever resolves. Each ends either mid-sentence or with a faint clicking sound, resembling a microphone being released underwater. None of the missing callers ever confirm follow-up communication. In the archives of Shenandoah's Communication Center, a technician once marked such recordings with a single letter D. It stood for disconnected. On the shelf below those tapes lies a yellowed note, unsigned, written in small, careful script. Some of the calls end before they begin. The unrecorded footage. In 2005, a film crew documenting wildlife migration in Yosemite returned from a week-long assignment with 60 hours of footage. When they began reviewing the material, several segments appeared blank, no sound, no image, just the faint hum of static and occasional blurs of motion. The timestamps, however, told a different story. Each blank section lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds, repeating at irregular intervals across multiple cameras. Even analog film reels, untouched by digital software, showed identical gaps. A technician examining the negatives noted that the missing frames had not been overexposed or lost to light leaks they had never existed. Incidents like this are rare, but not isolated. Across several US national parks, both professionals and visitors have reported camera failures that defy normal malfunction. Batteries remain charged, yet recordings vanish. In 1991, park researcher Helen Ruiz described how her VHS camcorder clicked repeatedly while filming a landscape in Glacier National Park. When she played it back, the tape contained one frozen frame, a still image of the valley, and a 6-minute block of black screen. The device itself was undamaged. "It's as if it filmed nothing but still air," she later wrote in her field notes. A ranger technician working in Denali during the summer of 1998 experienced similar loss using a thermal imaging camera intended to monitor wildlife at night. The instrument captured normal readings until 2:03 a.m., when all heat signatures vanished simultaneously. For nearly 7 minutes, the display showed uniform blue absolute cold. At 2:10 a.m., shapes reappeared. Trees, rocks, his own silhouette. Reviewing the footage, he noticed one anomaly. The clock in the corner of the screen jumped ahead 9 minutes, yet the recording continued smoothly, without skip. Photographers have tried to reproduce the effect. In 2013, a group of independent researchers placed GoPro cameras in known signal loss zones within Sequoia National Park. Over the course of a week, 5 of the 6 cameras stopped recording at the same time, each day 2:42 p.m. Local weather data showed no storms or interference. When powered back on, each camera displayed the same corrupted file size, 237 megabytes of unreadable data. Video recovery software returned only fragmented frames, showing trees distorted as if underwater. The 6th camera, positioned outside the area, recorded continuously without error. Older film provides subtler evidence. In Yellowstone's archives, there exists a roll of 16mm film shot by tourists in 1962. Most of it is ordinary geysers, deer, distant mountains. But one sequence, lasting 20 seconds, shows a forest clearing where the horizon flickers between light and shadow every few frames. Restoration experts discovered that those alternating frames were duplicates from different moments on the same reel, somehow reordered. Chemical analysis confirmed the film stock had not been spliced or tampered with. "It's as if time folded back on itself," noted archivist Daniel Frost in his 1989 memo. Modern digital equipment fares no better. A 2017 National Geographic expedition into Olympic National Park lost 3 body-mounted cameras during a 5-hour trek. The devices were recovered the next morning intact, still powered, with LEDs blinking as if recording. Inside, the memory cards were blank. Forensic analysis revealed that the data sectors had been overwritten by 0 values, not erased, but written as absence. "That doesn't happen from battery loss," the engineer said. "It happens when something tells the drive to record nothing." Rangers recount similar stories in routine work. Trail cameras used to monitor wildlife occasionally produce sequences of missing time. One example from Shenandoah in 2020 shows a bear approaching, pausing, and then suddenly appearing 12 feet away, no frames in between. The device's internal clock advanced by 9 minutes. Logbooks mark dozens of such instances across multiple parks, typically accompanied by partial radio interference nearby. Security systems at visitor centers have also captured unexplainable intervals. In 2011, motion-activated cameras at Yosemite's East Gate triggered multiple alerts overnight. Reviewing the footage the next day, staff found 15 consecutive recordings labeled "Activity Detected," each lasting exactly 60 seconds, yet containing only an empty path. In the background, a faint hum can be heard, lower than wind or mechanical noise. The sound stops abruptly as each clip ends. Analog photographers sometimes noticed distortions instead of voids. A ranger from Mount Rainier submitted several 35mm prints in 1986 showing faint streaks of light crossing the forest floor at perfect right angles. When the negatives were scanned decades later, digital sensors failed to render the same lines. They simply vanished in conversion. Experts concluded that the anomalies existed physically on the emulsion, but no longer translated to electronic format. They were recorded on a medium that no longer reads them, one technician said. In 2019, a drone pilot conducting landscape surveys near Crater Lake reported that his camera continued to transmit video for almost 10 minutes after he had powered it off. The screen displayed a stationary view of the forest canopy, motionless and silent. When he finally removed the battery, the image lingered for several seconds before fading. The file saved on his hard drive ends at the exact moment he pressed the power switch, not the moment the feed actually ceased. Forensic labs analyzing these materials describe a recurring pattern: perfectly normal environmental conditions paired with localized recording absences. No electromagnetic surges, no cosmic radiation bursts, no sensor heat failures. The footage simply refuses to exist. In 2022, a quiet meeting among National Park Service IT personnel addressed the growing archive of such incidents. The minutes of that meeting, later obtained through a records request, included one sentence underlined twice: "Data cannot vanish by coincidence across unrelated systems." The following paragraph, however, was redacted entirely. Within ranger offices, these blank segments are catalogued but rarely discussed. On internal hard drives, folders labeled "Footage Pending Review" sit untouched for years. Technicians quietly note the missing seconds, the frozen frames, the empty recordings that mirror each other across decades. At the bottom of an old film canister from Yellowstone's 1962 archive, a handwritten note remains tucked inside. "If you are reading this, you found what we couldn't see." The restricted report. In 1976, an unmarked envelope arrived at the National Park Service headquarters in Washington, D.C. Inside were 15 pages of technical printouts stamped "Property of U.S. Geological Survey Restricted Distribution." The attached memo bore no signature, only the title "Summary of Environmental Irregularities, Western Federal Lands." It referenced electromagnetic readings from Yosemite, Glacier, and Olympic National Parks that exceeded baseline field strength by factors inconsistent with geologic origin. No follow-up correspondence was filed. The report was quietly placed in a drawer labeled "Miscellaneous Atmospheric Events" and forgotten until a declassification review in 1994. Such buried exchanges appear throughout park history: letters between field scientists, engineers, and administrators referencing phenomena that official channels never acknowledge publicly. From the 1,950 seconds onward, internal memos reveal a pattern of controlled communication. When anomalies were logged, they were routed away from park records and into external offices, often under the guise of infrastructure testing. One of the earliest examples, dated 1958, came from Yellowstone Superintendent Warren Bell. He reported to the Department of the Interior that ranger radios were unusable in certain valleys and suggested underground electrical activity. The reply he received, classified until 1985, was from an Air Force Research Division. It advised him to cease investigation of transmission inconsistencies due to ongoing frequency calibration trials. Bell later wrote in his private notebook, "We're not testing someone else's." By the late 1960 seconds, collaboration between defense agencies and park management had become routine. A 1969 memorandum from the Defense Communications Agency mentioned temporary field interference within federally protected zones and authorized limited access to test propagation boundaries. Maps attached to the document show dots placed directly over modern blackout locations. None of the parks were informed at the time. In 1982, a meeting took place in Denver between National Park Service regional directors and representatives from Raytheon and Lockheed. Minutes from that meeting, released decades later through partial FOIA disclosure, show discussion of localized frequency stability experiments. The phrase "stability experiments" appears nowhere else in park literature. One line stands out: "Civilian exposure manageable. Recommend minimal disclosure." A separate correspondence from 1989, labeled "Interdepartmental, not for external review," summarizes an Air Force survey of Yellowstone's upper basin. It reports that magnetic resonance peaks at 3.2 Hz were observed within a 1-mile radius, and adds that local biological behavior altered during testing. The final page is missing. Researchers who have seen fragments of these files note that none mention blackout zones directly. Instead, they use euphemisms: propagation gaps, temporal irregularities, signal depressions. The documents read like weather summaries, yet contain precise timestamps, satellite identifiers, and frequency notations suggesting high-level instrumentation. In 1993, after several unexplainable communication losses during rescue operations, a park safety officer named Carl Meadows requested clarification on the restricted reports. His letter was returned with a short typed response from the Department of Energy: data withheld under National Security Directive 51B. The directive, declassified in 2009, pertains to electromagnetic field resilience and spatial coherence testing, No mention of national parks appears anywhere in it. Through the early 2000s, the language in internal communication shifted again. Official memos began referencing environmental integrity preservation zones. A 2004 interagency email chain between NOAA, NASA, and the National Park Service discussed a proposal to conduct controlled geomagnetic balancing operations in selected western parks. The test locations listed match previous blackout coordinates almost exactly. Not all cooperation was smooth. In 2007, a ranger in Glacier named Stephen Rudd accidentally copied himself on an internal email chain discussing field quieting results. The conversation included both park and defense engineers debating the repeatability of suppression intervals. When Rudd forwarded the thread to his supervisor asking for explanation, he was reassigned within 2 weeks to a different post in Alaska. His personnel file lists administrative relocation. Among the most revealing fragments is a 2010 NASA memo obtained by investigative journalist Lydia Keene. It summarizes remote sensor data from Landsat and Terra satellites showing non-reflective regions inconsistent with known surface materials. The memo closes with a caution: recommend coordination with Department of Defense before public release of corrected imagery. Keene published the document in 2015. It was later removed from online archives citing copyright concerns. By 2018, newer park safety guidelines included an unusual clause. Personnel encountering extended communication failure exceeding 15 minutes should withdraw and file a general interference report. No localized investigation is required. The directive's language implies knowledge of recurring zones, though the term blackout is never used. Private contractors continue to appear in records. Lockheed Martin's Environmental Division held multiple maintenance contracts for data relay towers across the national park network from 2019 to 2022. Some invoices list equipment not publicly catalogued adaptive frequency nodes, temporal synchronization units. When journalists questioned these listings, a Park Service spokesperson called them signal routers for emergency communications. Across thousands of pages, the restricted reports share one trait: careful understatement. They never conclude, only recommend monitoring. Scientists reading between the lines see a controlled narrative, an effort not to solve the mystery, but to contain it. One declassified memo from 1998 includes a short handwritten addendum, likely from a field engineer. If these fields are natural, they're unlike any natural field we've measured. If they're artificial, someone built them a long time ago. The addendum is unsigned. Its page number 112 suggests more that were never released. The vanishing records. In March 1998, an archivist named Daniel Lorne arrived for his shift at Yellowstone's administrative office and found an entire server rack offline. The previous night, the system had stored 40 years of scanned ranger reports, tens of thousands of pages digitized from paper archives. By morning, the drive contained only the directory names. The files were gone, not deleted, not corrupted, simply missing. System logs showed no external access and no sign of erasure commands. The only note recorded by the server's automated monitor was a single entry at 2:14 a.m. Checksum completed. Files equal 0. This was not an isolated event. Over the past half-century, park offices across the country have reported similar disappearances: archives wiped, drives reformatted, and physical files quietly missing from locked storage. It is a pattern that repeats without explanation, always involving records connected in some way to blackout phenomena. The first known incident dates to 1956. Glacier National Park staff reported that 6 ranger field journals had vanished from a secured cabinet after a minor office fire. The cabinet showed no damage, the lock was intact. When the park ordered replacements from the regional office, the duplicates arrived with missing pages. The absence went unnoticed until years later, when researchers found gaps in patrol dates that matched known communication failures from that same season. A later case occurred in 1973 at Olympic National Park. Meteorological data collected during a summer field study disappeared from the University of Washington's remote data terminal overnight. The data feed's time logs remained but contained blank values between 1:02 and 3:47 a.m. The project's lead researcher, Dr. Leonard Frost, later wrote to the National Park Service, "The system did not crash. The readings were replaced by empty intervals." His letter was filed under miscellaneous atmospheric phenomena and never answered. paper records have proven no safer. In 1985, a flood at Yosemite destroyed hundreds of files stored in the park's basement archives. Yet according to maintenance staff, only one cabinet suffered water damage, the one containing communications interference reports, 1,961, 1,978. Everything else in the room remained dry. The water had entered through an overhead vent that, by design, did not connect to plumbing. When questioned, repair crews could not explain how the vent had filled. By the 1,990 seconds, as parks transitioned to digital record keeping, disappearances began leaving traces in metadata. At Shenandoah National Park, incident logs for July 1994 contain file names and sizes but no data. The entries display creation and modification stamps mere seconds apart, suggesting mass overwriting. The file names themselves remain visible: signal test, zone 4, unexplained static, patrol time drift. Attempts to restore them from backup return the same error: file exists with no content. One IT specialist at Sequoia documented what he called negative duplication, a condition where erased files seem to copy themselves backward in time. In 2006, after a communications server reset, backup images showed versions of files dated one day earlier than their original creation, yet opening them revealed nothing but white space. When he printed a sample, the pages emerged blank, but electrically charged static clinging to his fingertips. He wrote in his maintenance log, "They're gone, but still there." Even external researchers have faced unexplained losses. In 2013, the University of Colorado's Geophysics Department compiled a decade of satellite and magnetic survey data from western parks. 2 months after submission to federal archives, all reference copies disappeared. The official explanation cited server migration failure, but local backups at the university also failed, their storage arrays reformatting spontaneously during the same week. The department's network logs show no intrusion, only a brief temperature spike in the server room at 3:11 a.m. Physical erasures have been more deliberate. In 2016, a Freedom of Information request for blackout-related documents returned a digital index listing 486 items. 3 weeks later, when the requester followed up, the same index had shrunk to 121. The missing entries no longer existed, even in archived web snapshots. The National Park Service cited routine records maintenance. Rangers who worked before digitization recall losing paper files that seemed to vanish in plain sight. One retired ranger from Denali told a researcher in 2020, "We'd finish a report, file it, and the next season it wasn't there. Not stolen, just gone. Like the cabinet never had that folder." He described walking into the office early one morning to find drawers open, labels missing, dust settled evenly as if untouched for years. Technicians who manage national archives use another term, quiet zeroing. It refers to data systems that purge themselves without command input. Loggers have documented such events coinciding with strong geomagnetic calm nights when solar activity is lowest. "It doesn't happen during storms," one analyst said. "It happens when the field is still." The missing records are not limited to text and numbers. Audio archives stored at Fort Collins include references to tapes labeled unclassified transmission events. Between 1999 and 2001, at least 30 of these recordings were documented, each tagged for review. None remain. Their absence is noted in later inventory sheets. Items 200 and 231 not found. Shelves undisturbed. Today, archivists speak carefully about these gaps. Officially, they are attributed to digital decay, misplaced storage, or the natural deterioration of paper. But private correspondence between staff tells a quieter story. One internal email, retrieved from a 2019 system audit, includes the line, "They don't want to delete the data, they want it unreadable." Among the last paper traces of these vanishings is a memo dated August 2008 from the Fort Collins archive manager to the Department of the Interior. It reads, "The files are disappearing faster than we can report them. Recommend discontinuing digital conversion until integrity confirmed." The next memo in sequence is numbered 174. Memo 173, the one containing that sentence, no longer exists. When asked years later about the phenomenon, one archivist paused and said, "It's not the records that vanish, it's the memory of having seen them, the boundary that moves." No one can say exactly when the first blackout zone appeared. The earliest records date back to before the parks existed, to surveyor notes written in the 1800s, lines on hand-drawn maps where compasses drifted, where horses refused to move forward, when no echo returned from the sound of a rifle shot. The land was marked unstable magnetics, or simply unknown. Decades later, the boundaries of America's national parks would quietly fold over many of those same coordinates, as if the system was built not just to preserve land, but to contain it. Rangers working today still whisper about those places. They talk about the trees that grow in perfect circles, the patches of moss that seem untouched by frost, the trails where footsteps sound distant even when close. They talk about hearing their own radio calls played back before they press the transmit button. And they talk about boundaries, the invisible lines that move. One day a radio works perfectly, and the next it dies in the same clearing. The boundary slides, drifts, reshapes itself like a tide with no ocean. In 2014, a maintenance worker named Brian Lutz mapped signal loss across Yosemite using handheld receivers. His notes, stored on paper to avoid data corruption, show shapes that don't stay fixed. Over 4 months, the regions of interference moved more than 2 miles east. The lines were not random, they curved gently, like an orbit. When Lutz compared them with old ranger maps from the 1970 seconds, he found the same pattern, but shifted west. His report, filed in November that year, concluded with a sentence that was later redacted from the public copy. The blackout field is mobile. Others before him noticed similar motion. In the 1960 seconds, radar technicians performing low-altitude sweeps for geological mapping reported transient returns, phantom hills and valleys, appearing where none existed. By the 1990 seconds, satellite imaging began to show irregular blurring over those same regions, as if the land beneath was changing shape. Analysts once suggested it was an effect of atmosphere or temperature. Later, they stopped suggesting anything. In 2009, 2 hikers following an unmarked trail in the Bridger Wilderness found a metal post half buried in the ground. The post bore an old National Park Service seal and a tag reading boundary marker 41 repositioned. According to park records, marker 41 had been retired in 1987 and relocated 3 miles away. The post they found was original, untouched, the tag rusted in place. A new marker still stood where it was supposed to. For reasons no one could explain, the original had returned. Technology doesn't help. Drones malfunction, sensors stall, and GPS coordinates spin slowly like clock hands. Yet those who have experienced the boundaries shifting describe it as calm, a stillness that folds around you, a long, empty pause between seconds. One ranger, interviewed anonymously in 2020, said, "You walk forward, and it feels like the world exhales. Then the trail behind you isn't where you came from." He refused to mark the location on a map. Scientists searching for explanations often return to the same question: how can empty space move? Some propose magnetic anomalies beneath the crust, regions where the Earth's field bends back on itself. Others speak of gravitational distortions, micro-lensing of light that warps perception. None explain the uniform reports of sound dropping, of time slowing, of coordinates slipping out of alignment. Whatever it is, it behaves less like a geological phenomenon and more like a system, a responsive layer woven through the parks, reacting, adjusting, concealing. In 2017, a retired NASA engineer named Louise Carr joined a volunteer research project in Montana's Glacier National Park. Using civilian-grade magnetometers, she logged variations in field strength every 20 feet along a 2-mile trail. The results formed a symmetrical pattern resembling concentric rings. When she returned the next week, she followed the same route, but the rings had shifted half a mile north. The readings suggested something alive, not biological, but dynamic. She later told a local paper, "It's not that the magnetism moves, it's that the place decides where to be measured." Hidden correspondence between the National Park Service and federal agencies hints that they have been tracking these movements for years. A memo from 1993 declassified only in fragments references mobile interference perimeters. Another, from 2004, discusses progressive migration of quiet zones. The phrases sound technical, but the implication is simple. The blackout areas are not fixed. They drift slowly across the landscape, as if following some invisible schedule. Visitors have described the sensation in human terms. "You feel it before you see it," said one camper who spent a night near Crater Lake in 2015. The forest goes silent, the air presses down, then your flashlight weakens, your phone dies, and the stars look closer. He stayed awake until dawn and left without taking a photo. When interviewed later, he said the silence wasn't frightening, just final, as if something was passing through. That same year, a satellite relay station in Utah recorded a 27-minute communication gap across 3 national park frequencies. The interruption began at 2:13 a.m. and ended at 2:40. During that time, radio towers in Yellowstone, Sequoia, and Olympic all went offline simultaneously. When systems resumed, each clock showed a different local time. The deviation between them, roughly 9 minutes, matched the documented time loss in earlier field incidents. Engineers couldn't replicate the failure. The event report was labeled Environmental Synchronization Error and filed under No Corrective Action. Since 2020, technicians have noted something new. The blackout zones seem to respond to human activity. Areas near heavy foot traffic shrink, remote valleys expand. Rangers theorize that whatever causes the interference avoids direct observation. Some liken it to a shadow defined only when light hits it, gone when looked at too closely. In one of the few surviving ranger memos from 1972, handwritten in pencil, there is a note near the bottom margin: the boundaries follow attention. Decades later, a digital field report from 2018 contains an almost identical line typed into the comment box. The more we look, the further it moves. Perhaps that is why the archives remain sealed, why the missing data stays missing, not out of secrecy, but caution. To measure something that reacts to being measured is to feed it definition, and definition, in the wilderness, can be dangerous. Visitors walking the quiet trails at dusk might pass through one of these regions without knowing. Their phones may flicker, their watches pause, their voices soften to whispers that don't echo. Then, a few steps later, everything resumes, the forest loud again, the air normal, time moving forward as if nothing happened. The only sign is a feeling left behind, subtle but certain, that something enormous and silent shifted nearby. Rangers don't mark these places on maps anymore. The coordinates are always wrong by the time the ink dries, but they keep watch. In the logbook still stored in remote cabins, a single phrase repeats every few pages, written by different hands over many years. Boundary moved again today, and beneath it, in smaller letters, one that no one ever crosses out. It's still moving. Somewhere beyond the marked trails and ranger boundaries, the blackout zones remain shifting, quiet, and invisible to the systems meant to measure them. The data vanishes, the coordinates drift, and those who look too closely often stop recording before they realize it. Maybe it's magnetism. Maybe it's something older, something the land still remembers and prefers to keep to itself. What's certain is that the wilderness still hides pockets of silence where technology, time, and memory all fall away, places untouched by explanation and untouched by sound. If you'd like to keep exploring the mysteries that lie just beyond the map, subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us again for another quiet journey into the strange, the hidden, and the forgotten. Until then, stay curious and listen carefully. The silence may be closer than you think.